Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's AWBA webinar series. My name is Taylor Fitz, and I'm very pleased to have you all with us for our inaugural webinar and what is going to be a new monthly series from our association. And really, our goal with this series is we want to bring together leading experts to discuss a range of topics. So things like emerging markets, policy developments, and the new technologies that are shaping the future of woody biomass and renewable carbon. So before we dive in, just a couple of quick housekeeping items for everyone. First up, if you have questions during the presentation, please submit them through the Q&A panel. We'll collect those questions throughout the presentation, and then we're going to reserve some time at the end for discussion. And then also just a quick reminder that we are recording today's webinar, and we'll email this to all registrants with the link to the recording afterwards. That way you all can have a chance to revisit this. You can share it with colleagues if you'd like as well. Okay, so on to today's topic. AI, it's certainly one of the biggest stories in the world right now for many reasons. You all are probably like me. I can't, look at the news or log on to social media and not see just, article after article about AIs and all the different ways that it's shaping our society or is poised to shape our society. But one of those ways is the creation of an enormous new demand for electricity generation to power all of the AI that is predicted to come online. And that's creating some really interesting opportunities for our industry. And then I think just follow-on effects for sustainable forestry, and then many areas of related domains to that. And to help us really unpack all of this and explore it, we are very fortunate to have one of our industry's leading experts with us today. Many of you will know William Bill Strauss. He's the president and the founder of Future Metrics, which is a consulting and research firm. It's widely recognized for its expertise in the wood pellet markets, biomass economics, and renewable energy strategy. Bill brings more than 4 decades of experience in the renewable energy sector. He's authored numerous influential papers on biomass markets and policy. He's been recognized as one of the biomass industry's most influential leaders, and he has been the recipient of the International Excellence in Bioenergy Award. Bill, thank you so much again for joining us today. I'd like for you to just go ahead and share your screen, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Taylor. And thanks for the introduction. I hope I can live up to some of those superlatives. Thanks very much. Yeah, we're going to go through a presentation today that I'm looking at the names on folks that are attending, and I know some of you, and I don't know a lot of you. So the presentation is geared towards a bit of education that some of you who are within the industry or close to the industry, some of this may be good knowledge that you already have. But we'll go through it fairly quickly and try to do a pretty comprehensive view of the industry. So I'm going to start out with a few slides here about the company. Everybody is curious about the name Future Metrics. We actually started back in the 1990s as a financial and commodity price forecasting outfit. So Future Metrics. And in the early 2000s, we got into the renewable energy business, specifically in the pellet space. The focus of the consultancy changed considerably, and we don't do commodity price forecasting anymore, although we still do modeling. It was a byproduct of me finishing a PhD in economics that got this company started. Notice I underlined operations guidance and optimization. I just wanted to highlight that. That's an area that some people don't realize we do. We've got operations expertise, and I like to say it can result in instant return on investment. because sometimes we see that it's just operating protocols that are the problem. No need for capital expense. And that one quote there is, I like that one. It's making pellets is easy, but achieving and maintaining easy is hard. So just a couple of advertisements there on the company, and then you guys can browse through the logos later, but you'll recognize many of those names. And then one last bit of self-promotion before we get into the content. And this actually has to do with artificial intelligence. I was at a conference last week in Arizona on business intelligence, a lot of BI and AI discussion. It's amazing where the industry is and where it's going. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. But we were asked to enter one of our dashboards in a contest, and we actually won. And we beat out some pretty big names like Microsoft and SAP and a few others. And there you go. That's me receiving the award. And that's a close up of the cool little trophy. So our dashboards are getting a lot of recognition. And bottom left corner there, when you review this later, if you're curious about how we do all these dashboards, it's an application called Squirrel. And there's a link to their website there. Okay, so let's get down to business. I often start my presentations with these kinds of slides to sort of give an overarching understanding of why we even do this. And it's carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. That's what's driving the decarbonization industry in general. A couple quick slides just to put it in perspective. This is total CO2 from fossil fuels going back a long time, and temperature anomalies. And they're highly correlated and accelerating, going up at an exponential pace. This slide actually shows atmospheric CO2 concentrations, and in the last 150 years, we've gone on quite an excursion, hitting new records every year in the spring when CO2 levels hit their peaks. We just hit another new record in May. And essentially, what we're doing is we're taking millions of years of carbon that's trapped in geologic formations from natural Earth systems, and it's all being released in a few hundred years. There's definitely a consequence, and this chart is the most alarming in terms of consequence. This is global sea surface temperatures, and you can see that something happened back in just a few years ago. Whereas sort of a gradual increase in sea surface temperatures from going back to about 1980 till now, suddenly there's a jump. And actually 2026 is on track. That's just a few days ago, the latest data. It's on track now to break another record. The jump is troubling because sometimes that means there's a tipping point has maybe been reached, and we're now into a self-reinforcing feedback loop that's just going to accelerate this change. And a lot of energy being stored in the oceans. Atmospheric temperatures, similar to change, and actually the break isn't so obvious, but there's still a break the last couple of years from these sort of gradual increases. So the topic of this presentation is data centers. So just a general overview. These are big energy hogs. A lot of them now are being built at gigawatt scale. They need base load 24/7 power. They need electricity all the time. And that means wind and solar are problematic in terms of renewable electricity. You need buffers of battery storage in order to make that work. And at terawatt hour scales, it's just essentially batteries are like an uninterruptible power supply. We all have them, or many of us have them on our computers. The power goes out, you've got some time, depends on how big it is, and then it's done. It's not something you can live on for very long. This chart shows you part of the challenge as well, and this is focusing on the United States. We're going to see a lot of coal plants retire over the next few years, all planned retirements, over 100 megawatts of power. Sorry, that's um, should be yeah, that's right. That's a lot of power being retired, over 100,000 megawatts. Um, so we're going to see a huge loss in the capacity of our grid from that, and it's got to be made up somewhere else. And you can see gas is by far the biggest. This is thermal generation, by the way. This chart doesn't include wind and solar. This one, what you see here is forecasts from essentially the same sources from August of 2025 and then this month, June 2026. And in less than a year, the forecast has been revised upward dramatically. The little bubbles to the left there with the arrow pointing down show the increase in from 2025 demand to 2035 in terawatt hours. And it's pretty dramatic. So what we're seeing here is, and a lot of this is driven by AI data center demand. Some of it's by electric vehicle growth, although in the United States that's forecast to be a little bit slower. But by 2035, it's expected to be a significant portion. And of course, heat pumps in the northern hemisphere, northern parts of the hemisphere. But a lot of the majority of that's AI demand. So what's this mean? Well, in 2035, we have over 1,000 terawatt hour shortfall in our grid. Total demand is going to be over 1,000 terawatt hours higher than total supply. And the stack you see on total supply there includes planned new capacity. So this is all based on announced build outs for nuclear, coal, natural gas, coal not so much, but all the solar build outs, the wind, hydro, we're not sure about. Hydro's been well exploited already. And actually we're seeing real challenges in hydro with droughts and low reservoir levels. But we took the projections and took 25% of pre-construction announcements. That may or may not be right. And hydro is not a huge piece. It's not going to make a big difference anyway. So we've got a problem. So what about batteries? Well, maybe in a couple decades, we'll get there, or maybe 1 decade, who knows? We're not there yet. And this is a picture of the world's largest integrated solar and battery storage project. It's in the Atacama Desert in Peru. Very, very dry spot. It never rains and there's never clouds. It's a great spot for solar generation. When this thing's completed, it's under construction. It's actually partially online. It'll be 11 gigawatt hours of storage. Well, New York City needs 140 gigawatt hours per day. So if that battery was supplying New York City and everything else dropped out, it would last 1.9 hours, and then the lights would go out. So that just gives you an idea of the scale needed, not just for New York City, but for the entire grid to remain stable with wind and solar generation. We got a ways to go. So let's transition a little bit from kind of the challenge and the problems to some solutions. And actually, this goes right to the industry that we've been in for a number of years. This is a solution that already exists. It's already deployed in some locations, not in the United States. And it can be implemented now with almost no lead time. And essentially what we're talking about here is converting existing coal-fueled power units from coal to sustainably sourced biomass-derived solid fuel. It's a mouthful, but we'll talk about that some more. So what is this? The title of this, and the title of that winning dashboard, by the way, was Nature's Natural Solar Energy Storage. That's exactly what woody biomass is, right? On a daily basis, the sun creates all kinds of new biomass. The amount of energy hitting the Earth's surface is tremendous. And a good chunk of that you can see from the slide, over 9,000 times larger than annual global demand. Plants take some of that energy and convert it into carbohydrates. So every year converts billions, photosynthesis and solar energy converts billions of tons into plant matter and oxygen. And also it takes CO2 as a feedstock. Great thing. So about 4.1 billion hectares of forest land on the planet. That's a little over 10 billion acres, a lot of forest land. But not all those forests should be used to supply the forest products industry. And I'm saying the forest products industry at large, because as we'll see, I have a slide in just a few minutes that shows that the pellet manufacturers are just a very small part of the forest products industry. So the forest products industry depends on managed, cultivated, continuously growing forests to produce logs. And those logs make lumber, pulp and paper stuff, packaging, tissue, engineered wood products, all the stuff that we kind of take for granted in our daily lives. To put it in perspective in terms of storage, because we talked about battery storage a few minutes ago. Well, the forests are nature's natural solar energy battery. I'll say that again, right? They store a lot of energy, about over 4 billion gigajoules, or 115 million gigawatt hours per year. And if you compare that to solar and wind generation in 2025, it's about 15 times more energy than produced by wind and solar generation. That's actual production, not capacity. So taking into account fairly low capacity factors on some wind and solar, much larger. So the point I think I want to drive into people's thinking here is that we're talking about a perpetually renewing resource, just like wind and solar energy is a perpetually renewing resource. Everything depends on solar energy. Even fossil fuels were created by biomass capturing solar energy millions of years ago. But we can take some of that captured solar energy that's turned into a solid matter and use that in a productive way to help power AI data centers. So how much of the world's forests can we think about? And here I want to kind of shift a little bit in the discussion to talk specifically about sustainability. Because when we start talking about using biomass as a fuel source, and ignoring for a minute that forest products industry makes lumber and tissue and packaging and everything else, it also makes wood pellet fuel. The first question asked by folks when we talk about this is, well, aren't you going to destroy the forests? Isn't this going to rape our forests? We're going to have parking lots or just nothing where the forest used to be. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, forests are managed to provide continuously renewing products for the forest products industry. So here's a graphic of a stylized graphic of a Georgia pine plantation and what we're going to call rotation blocks. It's, the real world is not quite as neat and square as that. This is AI generated, but it gives you a really good idea of what we're talking about here. So in that image, we have a bunch of rotation blocks. Some are mature and ready for harvest. In fact, in the bottom left corner, there's a little logging operation going on, and they're harvesting that block. Some are newly planted. Some are in various stages of growth. And up in the upper left corner is a sawmill, which depends on wood coming into the front door of that sawmill every day of the year, every year, forever. You spend that kind of money on a sawmill and you don't expect it to run out of wood in 5 years or 10 years. You're not raping the forest. You're matching the demand to the amount of new wood that grows. So every year there's a new rotation block that contains enough wood to keep that sawmill operating every day. And you just keep doing that. It's a sustainable operation. It's a dynamic, sustainable operation. So nobody's raping the forest. They're managing the resource carefully. And it's good business practice and happens to be really good environmental practice as well. So where do we get all this feedstock for pellet production? Well, largest producer of wood pellets for export is the United States. You can see in that bar chart on the left side there, US dominates. Catching up quickly has been Vietnam in the center there. Their growth rate has been tremendous. You can see a compound average growth rate 2012 to last year of 46.5%. Rapidly growing industry in Vietnam. The rest of the world has had some ups and downs. Russia doesn't export anymore, down in the second one from the left. And the Baltic states suffered a few difficult years. They're clawing back. And then the rest of the world is sort of coming along. That's Southeast Asia, other than Vietnam, and Australia, and South America, and New Zealand. Okay, so back to the US is a huge producer. How does the US end up getting a hold of the material to make wood pellets? Well, back to the sustainability story. This is how harvested pine tree is merchandised. And that means parts of the tree that have the highest and best use go to the highest and best use. You don't make wood pellets out of the saw log portion. That bottom portion of that tree, which is nice and fat and straight, turns into lumber. That's the highest value of a tree. And that's what trees are grown for primarily in managed forests, is to make lumber. Then you move up the stem and you come into the lower diameters and different challenges. And it may be pulpwood. It may be wood chips to supply oriented strand board factories or other types of engineered wood products. But the tree is still used, and that's a higher and better use than the third part on the tree, which is the stuff that nobody else wants. It's the tops, the limbs, the branches, the small diameter crooked stuff that can't turn into anything else useful. That turns into wood pellets. So the pellet folks are really bottom feeders. We'll do quickly take a quick look at this graph. This is actually from one of our dashboards. But what I wanted to show with this is that the primary forest products users, that's the primary harvest on the left. This is all of North America, which is Canada and the US, the data behind this. That's the primary harvest. And then you can see where most of it goes into lumber, flooring, etc. That's the brown. The yellow is paper and packaging. By far the largest amount. And then the byproducts from those processes, especially from the lumber mills, the sawmills, ends up going into other uses. And some of it makes its way into pellet mills. And you can see export pellet mills were 3.2% of the primary harvest. This is 2024 data, I think, if my memory's correct, or 2023, sorry. The data's a little out of date. So it's just a small bit anyway. So if you're against making pellets, you have to be against all the rest of that stuff because it all comes from the same place. Once again, pellet producers are bottom feeders. This information is for those on this webinar who are not familiar with the forestry industry and how this works and who think we're going to be destroying forests to make this strategy viable. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Actually, the pellet manufacturers perform a value add by taking the byproducts from the sawmills that used to be called waste. Okay, so how many megawatts of generation can be produced from a managed forest? Let's transition now from worrying about is it sustainable? Yeah, it's sustainable. To the idea of actually fueling a data center. Well, what I'm going to do is hopefully this works. I'm going to scoot a different screen over here on the sharing screen. There you go. Hopefully you can see that. And what you're looking at here is one of our dashboards. And this just happens to be the dashboard that won the award that I was showing off at the beginning of the presentation. So let me tell you what you're looking at. If you look in the upper left corner, you can see this is the starting size of the forest, the area ready for harvest. And in this case, we have 20,000 hectares, right? And if you slide this, you can see you can increase or decrease the size of the forest. So this dashboard is fully interactive, and everything changes when you change that. So we'll just stick it there. And this forest is 190, almost 200 square kilometers, right? So that's um, uh, it's about 14 kilometers on a side, or about 9 miles on a side. So just to kind of get a vision of how much space this takes up, this managed forest, it's nine miles on a side. That's not huge, especially when you look at the size of a state like Georgia or some of the other southern states. It's a little dot, right? So we're not talking about huge quantities. And we'll get back to this button here, is it a lot, in just a second. But essentially, you can change some of these input assumptions, moisture content, energy density, et cetera. And here you can say, when are we going to harvest this plot? So this chart shows you a growth curve for let me make this 2,000 hectares just to make it nice and round. Oh, I can't quite get it there. Oh, well. Um, this shows you the growth curve for this plot. In year zero, almost nothing. And what we're charting here is how many gigawatt hours of energy this particular forest, which is about 9 miles on a side, is storing. And it accumulates. The little green squares on top is the new megawatt hour or gigawatt hours that are being stored. And the rest of it is the accumulation. So we're actually growing a forest, making wood, and storing a lot of energy in that forest. And at some point, that forest gets harvested, and that's usually somewhere around this inflection point. So there's a point at which future growth is much, much slower. Forests can only, in a given area, can only hold so much wood. And growth rates actually decline for a variety of reasons after a certain point. So you're not sequestering any more carbon or megawatt hours or gigawatt hours. So we're assuming here that this inflection point is 80% of the harvest maximum. That's the upper right corner. You can change that. If in this case, we now have about 13,500 gigawatt hours stored in the wood. Now, how much of that forest actually becomes pellet fuel? This slider says 40%. In other words, we're saying that 60% of that harvest turns into lumber, pulp chips for packaging and tissue, et cetera. Not so much these days for printed media. That's on a big decline. But the leftovers from the primary use of the wood is 40%. It could be less, it could be more. It depends on where you are, the type of forest, the demand for who's demanding the stuff. Let's just leave it there, and you can change that. So if we assume that 40% makes its way into pellet fuel, that's about 5,400 total gigawatt hours. And if we have a unit back here's basically the punchline of this entire dashboard. Down here in the bottom is how many megawatts size a power unit could be. So here we have about a 500 megawatt generating station. That's about half the size of a typical nuclear power station, unit, which is 1,000 megawatts. I mean, we're talking about real power here. And this is all from a small plot. Now, this isn't quite accurate because this is one plot and this is 1 year. We're not going to run this for 1 year. So is this a lot? We're going to select Georgia here. And essentially, this harvest at 200 square kilometers is about 0.2% of the total area in the managed timberland in Georgia, not total land. This is managed forest land that's supplying the forest products industry. So if we set the harvest at 32 years, which is also something you can adjust in this, that means they're going to be drawing on this managed forest over about 6,000 square kilometers. And that adds up to about 6.7% of managed forests in Georgia. So in other words, this 500 megawatt power station can depend on the scraps and leftovers, the byproducts from from about 6.7% of managed forest. Or you could think of it this way. If you did 10 times this much, you'd be at 67% of the managed forest. And you would have 10 times as many as 500 megawatts just in the state of Georgia. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint now. I mean, yeah, to the presentation. Now you've seen that. By the way, that dashboard is free to use on our website. Okay, so but wait a minute, we're talking about making a lot of power for data centers in Georgia with their pellets, but don't they already make pellets and export pellets with those same residuals? And the answer is yes, they do. And actually, that chart shows you that Georgia is the leading export state. In 2025, they had almost a 30% market share in U.S. exports of wood pellets. So they're already exporting a lot of pellets. Uh, but, and there's a big but here, next year, policy in England changes. And this policy is going to dramatically impact U.S. pellet producers in the U.S. Southeast. So here's the policy change in the UK. This chart shows you industrial wood pellet sector. This is coal replacement pellet fuel that's shipped all around the world. And this is demands by region. So we have the UK right at the bottom. And the UK has traditionally been the largest consumer. And this year, they will be the largest consumer. They're going to import a little over 10 million tons of wood pellet fuel in 2026, probably. Japan's not far behind. They're now at the top of the stack. They've been growing pretty significantly, in fact, rapidly over the years. And next year, we'll probably surpass will surpass the UK as the world's largest importer of wood pellets. But the key takeaway from this chart is the down arrow there. UK demand is going to drop by 500,000 tons next year, starting in April of 2027. That's not that far away. And what does that mean? Well, this is market share of fuel, pellet fuel imported in the UK. 80% of that, on average, recently has been from the US, and actually in recent data, over 90%. The last month's data, which is 2 months back, the trade data takes a little while to come out, it was over 90%. So almost all the pellet fuel the UK is importing is coming from the United States. You can see the rest of the countries bumping along the bottom down there. Latvia has probably dominated market share. Canada used to be a big contender. It's dropped a lot, but the US is by far the dominant supplier. So we're looking at a huge impact on the US Southeast pellet producers. All right, so we're down to the last 4 or 5 slides, and I'll try to wrap this up in the next few minutes, and then that'll leave us about 15 minutes or so, or 20 minutes for questions if there are any, and discussion. Just to reiterate the point, and this is kind of going back to the sustainability concerns, right? There's a lot of criticism, and you'll see some fairly radical non-governmental organizations making statements about the sustainability of this industry that are based on highly misleading assumptions and premises. This industry is the same industry that produces lumber and cabinets and Amazon boxes and toilet paper. I always like to bring that up. I think that's something we all would rather not have. They all come from the same sources, and that's continuously renewing forests. Pulp mills, sawmills, engineered wood products mills. You don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars and expect to use up all the wood in a few years. The idea is you size the mill to equal or be less than the growth rate of the forest surrounding the managed forest surrounding your mill. So if you use 1 million tons a year, that means at least 1 million tons a year of new wood has to grow in that region. The forest can't be depleted. It has to be continuously renewing. And that's why this is a sustainable industry. It's based on, from a business model, sustainability, and that translates into sustainability on the grand scale, environmental and ecological sense as well. So there's limitations, clearly. And the limitation is you can't you can't cross the sustainability boundary, that is. You can never take more from the renewing resource than is being renewed by the growth of the new forest. So growth to removal ratio has to be greater than 1 at least. And it actually, in many locations in the United States, it's far greater than 1. The loss of pulp mills in many areas means that the demand for pulp chips has disappeared. Sawmilling is changing locations from one region to another. So demand for forest products in some areas, and I live in Maine, here it's the loss of pulp chip demand has been dramatic. And the growth rate of Maine's forests, which have traditionally been used to make lumber and paper, are far greater than the removal rates. There's plenty of room for an increase in the forest products industry, not only in my state of Maine, but many other locations. So we have to maintain that as the actual boundary, but that's actually the way it works now. There's already independent third-party certifying organizations, highly respected organizations that certify that every ton of wood pellets coming into, say, England for power generation come from sustainable sources. The British policy does not allow non-sustainable imports. You fail to get your policy support if you are participating in any kind of deforestation activities. Okay, so there's significant opportunity right here in the US because of the UK market loss next year. So this is where we would like to see the message a little more broadly broadcast on this whole idea, this strategy. Because the big hyperscalers, the big AI buildouts, the Metas and Microsofts of the world are doing things like installing their own natural gas power generation systems to supply sort of inside the fence power, if you will. In today's market, maybe that makes sense. I would be a little nervous about relying on a depleting resource, especially when demand for that depleting resource is going to go up dramatically as more natural gas is used, more infrastructure is needed, more has to be extracted. It's a depleting resource. There's no way around that fact. So what's going to be the supply of natural gas in 5 years or 10 years, especially if global demand picks up and they're willing to pay a high price? I think it's a big risk to do that. But that's what they're doing. Some actually care about green electrons, even though the US itself has no policy that supports the use of green electrons in power generation, if you will, in this sense, or the use of renewable fuel for solid fuel to replace coal. Some of these big names have a global presence and they have green credentials they need to keep polished at a global scale. So Microsoft in particular has been very active in buying carbon credits in the world markets. In fact, they were a major investor, or they bought a major chunk of carbon credits from Ørsted for their carbon capture project in Denmark. So they care. So they should be paying attention to this strategy. They should be expanding their perspective of what low carbon, reliable, and baseload power generation can be for data centers. That's the message that we'd like to see getting out. And two last slides. I thought I'd mention carbon capture, even though it's not core to what we're talking about today. But it's a growing industry. It's being deployed in Europe. There's still some major projects over there that are in startup. We're all watching closely. We want to see them running full blast. And I'm talking about biomass carbon capture storage. UK policy is kind of built around this taking off because this is the only pathway really to succeeding in a decarbonized goals, in the decarbonization goals that we have to meet in order to keep our planet livable in the future. So CCS, or BECCS as it's called, is an actual add-on. And if you can sell your carbon credits for the sequestered CO2, there's actually a real enhancement to the business model as well. Very last slide, and this one was added on recently because of all the hoo-ha about saving coal jobs in the coal-powered coal industry. not complaining about that. Government policy to protect workers. I'm an economist, so sometimes I think it can be useful. Sometimes I think it can be counterproductive, but it is happening. A lot of money, U.S. federal money, going into keeping coal plants running to purportedly support employment in the coal industry. Well, let's talk about that in relationship to the industry we just talked about. If you look at the chart on the left, that's how many jobs it takes to fuel a 1,000 megawatt power station. All right, so that's a pretty big power station. If it was coal, that's a lot of coal. It's about 3,800 jobs. And this is not just direct jobs, but indirect and induced jobs. So there's the whole multiplier effect included in these analyses. But if you look at pellet fuel for that same plant, 100% conversion, it's a couple thousand more jobs almost. Much larger job creation. The supply chain for pellet fuel is more complicated than the supply chain for coal, and it just makes more jobs. So if you care about jobs, they should be putting federal money into this industry as well. And by the way, if you look at the rest of that chart, natural gas, not much, right? It doesn't take much. There's no mining, there's no transportation. It's all pipelined. Nuclear, even less. And of course, wind and solar, zero. We're talking about how much fuel to run 1,000 megawatts. Well, you don't have any fuel in wind and solar. The chart on the right shows you employment in coal mining and logging. And interestingly enough, they kind of matched up, right? So they've both been about a minus 50% if you go back to year 2000. So this is actual jobs in thousands. This is not a percentage or an index. So essentially, they started with about the same number of jobs, and the last data point, which was just recently, they ended with about the same number of jobs. So if there's federal policy for coal jobs, it seems that they should be looking at logging jobs as well, which is the very front end of this supply chain. With that, I will call it quits. You can look at a nice picture of me at Whistler, actually, a couple of years ago. All right, I'll stop sharing.
Excellent, Bill. Thank you so much for the great presentation. Just a reminder to the group, if you do have a question, you can submit that in the Q&A, and we'll get to it. And Bill, we've got one question that has come in that I'll read it out for you and the group. So it says, according to my estimates, 1 megawatt capacity requires about 5,000 to 5,500 metric tons of white pellets, depending on the size of the power plant. For a medium-sized 400 megawatt plant, you would need about 2 million metric tons of white pellets. So how do you see high volumes of pellets being sourced for converted power plants? Would it be integrated build of new capacity, existing capacity nearby, or through spot markets?
Yeah, really, really good question. Pretty right on your conversions to tons to megawatts. The U.S. this year is going to export over 10 million tons of wood pellets. So it's already producing that much. And this is mostly out of the Southeast U.S. So already we're producing 5 times what you just said in terms of fueling one power station. Should that keep being exported? Maybe, but there's a lot of challenges after the 2027 policy change in the UK. There's also, I didn't mention it, but there's uncertainty in other jurisdictions as well. The Dutch market looks uncertain. Who knows? There's upsides potentials in Poland, possibly some other European states as well, or countries, but for sure, U.S. is going to see a huge hit on exports into the UK. So if nothing else, probably 4 to 5 million tons of pellet supply in the U.S. is going to be hungry for a new home next year. Some of that may still go to Drax, but Drax is definitely, and Limeouth are definitely going to, first Drax will source from their own factories first. So the hit's going to fall pretty hard on the other producers. Some may have alternative contracts. There's talk about bridge policy offtake agreements. I've heard of a few recently signed where Drax is buying some pellets between now and 2031. But it still means a drop in demand of close to 5 million tons. And so a lot of that is U.S. producers, whether some of the ones that are produced still supplying the other 3 to 4 million tons that go into the UK, maybe, but that still means there's a lot of excess supply. So there's room right now, and that's what I said, this could happen right now, for enough pellet fuel to produce maybe 1,500 megawatts of power today, that you don't have to build new production capacity. That's, I think, quite doable. As far as more later, what are the boundaries or the sustainability boundaries? What are the limits to growth in this industry? That's such an important question. We've actually asked that ourselves, and we've tried to answer that question a few times, but we're not smart enough as a consultancy in the forest products industry. We really depend on experts who that's what they do. What are the potentials for growth, and how big can this industry get? Well, if you simply look at growth to harvest ratios and don't pay too much attention to economics, the cost of getting the wood, it's huge. There's just the industry can become massively larger. But it can't be just that there's plenty of wood there and sustainably growing wood. It has to be, is it economically available and can it get to market? And that restricts where this can happen in the future. But with that said, there's still plenty of room for growth, even in the US Southeast and in other parts of the country. I mean, like I said, in my state of Maine, there's 4 million tons a year maybe of pulp chips. Demand has disappeared. It's a pretty big pellet factory, a bunch of big factories actually. So I think there's room for growth. Is this going to solve AI power demand problems? Not even close, right? It's that challenge of over 1,000 terawatt hour shortfall in 2035. This is going to put a dent into that, but it's not going to solve it. And in fact, all thermal generation is essentially a bridge policy to the day when energy storage is huge and sufficient to buffer wind and solar generation, so that most of the power used by the grid and even by AI data centers is solar generated or wind generated. We're a long way from that day, but as we move towards that day, the demand for thermal generation is going to decline. So, this is a bridge policy. It's a slow motion bridge policy over 20 years, maybe more. But that's what it is. And so there's a real demand, there's a real opportunity right now for this solution. It's pragmatic, it's rational, it makes really good sense, and it's ready to deploy now. And by the way, the modification to a coal station to convert from coal to pellet fuel, pretty modest. And a lot of that can be done while the plants are running. So there's not a whole lot of downtime as well to make that conversion. Depends on the kind of coal the plant's using, the design, the boilers and the pulverizing systems and everything else. There's a lot going into that. But in general, it doesn't take long and it's actually really cheap. It's at least 1/10 the cost of building a new power generation station of similar size of any kind of fuel source. And you don't have to wait. You don't have to get permitted and wait, 5 years or whatever until this thing starts working. It's working now. So it's a really good idea.
Thanks, Bill. We've got several more questions that have come in, so let's try to make this a bit of a lightning round, if you will, with crisp answers. Just given that we have limited time remaining, but
I'll do my best. I'm not very good at crisp answers, but I'll do my best.
So jumping to the next question, how do the costs to convert and renew a coal plant compare to other new capacity?
Actually, that's how I ended my last rather long-winded answer. It's 1/10 or less. It's almost nothing. The majority, probably 50% of that cost is dry storage for white pellets. The other half is modifying burners and maybe the coal mills and stuff. But essentially, pulverized coal and pulverized pellets are the same thing in many ways. You need a higher volume in the boiler to not derate, to not to lower the power output of that boiler. And that requires some modifications in the fuel feeding systems and the burners, but it's pretty modest. It's known technology. It's been done many, many times already in other areas. So it's not like you're inventing something new. You're just taking practical known knowledge and applying it to your power generating station. It doesn't cost much. It's way less than new builds of any kind of source, whether it's combined cycle natural gas or, certainly nuclear. You don't have to wait 10 years.
Great, great. Thanks, Bill. Moving on to the next question. Do you know if AI companies have any interest in power produced by cogeneration at sawmills, which would typically have a max capacity of 30 to 40 megawatts? In other words, a sawmill's cogen power plant would have much smaller power production capacity than the AI demand.
Yeah, it's a question that I don't think I have an answer for. I could just take a guess. I'm sure if the powers could be, obviously sawmills are located here, there, and everywhere, so it has to be wheeled across the transmission system. But if they're green electrons and the price is right, and why not? I would imagine there'd be a deal for that. I mean, a lot of people now buy so-called renewable energy at their homes from solar and wind and pay a little higher price for it sometimes. So you can go green anywhere from power produced anywhere.
Fantastic. And then this next one, it's a bit more of a comment, but I wanted to get your reaction to it. It says, if wood demand in the U.S. reduces over time, then active forestry will diminish alongside of it to balance out the demand and supply. Less carbon will be captured by active forest in this scenario. We are all better served by a healthy, growing active forest base, and wood pellet usage plays a role in achieving this.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. It was well said. I'd like to try to
Awesome.
guess who said that, but good job.
And then the last question that I see here, what is the biggest quote if in this whole equation? What's the one thing that has to fall into place for this concept to succeed?
Yeah, that's a pretty neat question. It's a difficult one to answer, I think, but here's what I would say. There's a couple of things. It's not just one thing. First of all, it's just education and knowledge. Most people don't know this option exists. And then when you're first talking about it, it just sounds kind of primitive. I mean, burning wood for energy, it's kind of like caveman type things. It's not cutting edge technology. It's not digital. It's not high tech. It is pretty basic. So you kind of have to get past these prejudices about the style of production. Efficiency, sustainability, all very good things to pay attention to, but they shouldn't be roadblocks to implementing this process. Certainly, big names who the very vocal, radical NGOs are pretty good at shaming companies for biomass use. I mean, Enviva's been in the crosshairs of Dogwood Alliance for years in what I would call a propaganda campaign. But it matters. It does sway public opinion. So, the concern and the fear of being in the crosshairs of somebody like that and being smeared for using biomass derived fuel instead of fossil fuel. I'm surprised that doesn't get them all up in arms. Is maybe another deterrent. So it's really working with the utilities, the folks that own these big coal stations. The operators, I think it's a pretty easy sell because you can go visit stations that have been converted that are running on pellets and see if they work just fine. You're not going to, it's not going to turn into a nightmare. The plant's not going to shut down or have problems. It's more as you move your way up in management on decision making to implement this strategy. That's where really education is important and a little more difficult. And I think that's probably the biggest if. Can we get past that? Policy that incentivized the reduction in CO2 emissions would make a difference. If it becomes costly to emit carbon dioxide, which it is in some places, or you get a subsidy for not doing it, that motivates decisions by upper management, makes it a lot easier. But we don't have that in this country. So until we have that, we have to go on the demand for green electrons from the AI data center folks willing to pay the price for power generated by pellet fuel in a converted coal station.
All right, great. If you can answer this next one in 60 seconds, we can get to it, Bill. What are your thoughts on the future of black pellets versus white pellets in the U.S.?
Well, some of you may know, and I'll do this in 60 seconds if I can. We've just published a rather couple large bits of research on this topic. We've taken a hard look at this. We think there's a place for it, especially as you see lower capacity factors coming into play. That is, fewer hours in the year in which the unit is generating. As you get down below about a 40% capacity factor and you're doing a new conversion, the cost of the dry storage to keep white pellets dry and the amount of storage that you need, because you're going to be taking pellets all year, but you're only going to be burning them for 4 months a year, becomes problematic. And therefore, putting the pellets in what used to be the coal yard is now the black pellet fuel yard makes a lot more sense. You pay a little more, but you actually the net cost is lower in the long run when you factor in the cost of dry storage, the avoided cost of dry storage. So I think there's a strong market there for fuel black pellets, and I also think highly carbonized biomass, high carbon content material for use in, say, iron ore reduction, refining. I think there's a bright future there as well. So I think this market has a long way to go. It's not going to end as the power generation market goes into that sunset I talked about in 20 years as we get more and more energy storage. I think there's other uses for homogeneous, densified material made from biomass, and pellet producers are really good at doing that. And so other markets are going to be interested in buying the product too.
Excellent, excellent. Right on time as well. So let's leave it there for today. Bill, I want to thank you very much again for the excellent presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time out to share your research and your insights with everyone. Would also like to thank everybody who joined us today for the thoughtful questions and the discussion. We are really looking forward to bringing everybody additional expert speakers and timely discussions on policies and markets and new technologies that are going to shape the future of woody biomass. A quick plug too, if you are not already a member of AWBA, I'd encourage you to visit our website to learn more, woodybiomass.org. And just thank you again to everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. So hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you.